To start with my topic, this one I presented this for a developer marketing summit, focusing really on the approach of how we take care of or address developer marketing strategies. I'm going to focus on showing your value at your company, either as a consultant or working in a brand. So what you're seeing here is a result from the latest 2024 DevRel agency survey, where it's focusing on what is the biggest challenge for your developer marketing program. The number one is attracting new developers, which we talked about earlier with the session with Hall. The number two is what we are focusing on today, is you needing to provide the impact of how are your work impacting the business. We can interpret it. So one of the things is about metrics, right? How do you attach to revenue, etc. But at a personal level, what we're talking about is how can you demonstrate to your team, to other teams of just what do you do, right? How can we believe that you have made the right decision, especially in cases where we cannot approach both A and B and see the impact, right? You want to choose the right decision. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is look at how do we approach strategy and how can that help you demonstrate your value in your strategic thinking. So to address this question, I think we might have to go back a little bit to talk about what is strategy. A little philosophical here. So when we think about providing value in our organizations, oftentimes what we are asked to do is to go from A to B, right? We're here today, we want you to be somewhere else tomorrow. But if it's only from A to B, anything could be by chance, right? We just happen that we made a turn here and a turn here. Well, the next one is, this is what I will call a strategy. It is still a plan, right? We're still going from A to B, but it is a plan coming out of a much bigger picture. It's really the idea of using data to inform strategy. And by now, I have two quick clarifications to make based on the responses we've got before. The first is, I don't have data, so I guess there's nowhere I could go, right? But in reality, what we have seen is that most of the times when we see the word data, what we're thinking of is the traditional type of quantitative metrics. So think about number of clicks, number of registrations, right? So for some organizations, you have the system set up, so it's easy to get. For others, maybe not. But in reality, what we are seeing is that there's so much more than that. For example, we have lots of qualitative data that we can utilize. So at Catchy, we conduct interviews with stakeholders to get that institutional knowledge. We conduct social listening to understand what developers are talking about you, about your product, about your company, or your program. We also look at user-generated content in the community about what they are creating using your product. So they offer lots of great insights that may not be accessible or available just using number of clicks. And there are also situations where you might have to just create your own data. For example, you may build a scoring system on a scale of 1 to 5. You may just assume a baseline, regardless of where it is, to understand the growth or the decrease. Or sometimes you may just create a net new variable, right? So the key theme here is that there are many different types of data that you can utilize to inform your strategic thinking. So that's the first clarification. And then the second one is that by the point where you have this data, there's this intimidation almost in the field of like, I'm not a statistician. I don't have the software, I don't have the tools, I don't have the methodology to make sense of them. But I don't think anyone of us here, maybe any mathematicians here in the room, or anyone want to be, probably that's not our priority, right? So what I have seen to be just good enough to inform our strategic thinking is something called the 4 pillars of data visualization. So those 4 pillars would be comparison, distribution, composition, and relationship. So I draw lots of inspiration from this framework in the sense that you don't have to run advanced regression analysis. Just by going into these 4 directions, you may know just enough for you to know which one may be a better option for you. And how this looks like in real life is through the use of various strategic frameworks. And lots of these frameworks may look similar with the visuals because they may have drawn inspirations from typical or foundational marketing practices or business practices. But in our field, they are also infused with lots of insights about what we know about the developer audience, about our industry, and about your products. So that's all of my building blocks for our approach, which can be summarized as turning data into strategy using strategic frameworks. So that's our approach. And today, with the remaining 20 minutes maybe, I'm going to show 3 examples of real-world use cases that we have looked into at Catchy of addressing developer marketing problems using this approach. Ready to get started? All right, so the first one, I would love to start with content, just to reiterate on the importance of content for developers. Again, from the same 2024 DevRel survey, what we're seeing is that the number one most effective marketing or outreach tactics identified by DevRels or developer marketers is content marketing. So what this means is that more than half of all of you probably already have created some content, published it, and got some success. And you would like to continue the success of this engine. And in this process, one question we're always asking to keep this engine running is, what developer content should I create next? There are just so many of them. Where do I start? Right? So let's see how we can answer this question using our approach. So according to our approach, the first step is the data. So let's see, in this case, what data can be relevant to help us understand the situation. And I will argue is your existing content mix. So think about all of the articles, all of the videos, all of the shorts, all of the social media posts that are published. That's your data set, especially if you are working in a really large organization where every team has their own quarterly goals. They're producing, pumping out different content pieces, right? So the volume might be a lot, but what is missing is that holistic approach. Basically, what have we done? What have we put out there for developers? Are they really addressing their needs? So that's our starting point. What you will have is a long list of items of all of these content pieces as your data set. And then the next step would be, how can we make sense of your existing content mix? And the goal is to identify gaps and opportunities. So we'll need some tools here to help us with that. We believe that developers go through generally a journey from discover to evaluate to learn, build, scale, and advocate. At each different stage, a developer would have different needs, right? They will have different questions they want answers for. They may have different behaviors, right? So that's the first building blocks, or the variables. And then the next variable would be the content types. Here are just some examples, such as use cases, dummy projects, etc. The list can go on, but the theme here is there are different visual forms of content that you can choose to produce, and they may have different impacts or strengths and weaknesses. So now you have 2 variables, developer journey on the x-axis, content types on the y-axis, and what you have is a framework, like a matrix. And what this matrix can tell us is the different roles of each content type along the developer journey. So we may argue that content types such as paid media plays a much stronger role in the early stage of the journey. But then when the developer knows about you, are interested in you, and then they may move on to documentations or code samples. So that's our framework. And now what we can do is to apply this framework to your data set. So let's see, are we doing a good job by addressing the different content types and questions that a developer may have? And that's what we will call a content audit. We look at all of our content pieces, fresh and available, to see where they fit in the journey and are they addressing those questions. And the output may look something like this. It's like a heat map where we're using the light yellow, medium yellow, or dark yellow to demonstrate coverage. So coverage here means a few things. Number one, do you have anything at all? Number two, do you have enough different content types or pieces for different topics and different preferences? And also, are they effective, right? Are they actually answer the questions a developer may have at those stages? So from there, you can then map out how you are doing with your current content mix. So let's see some examples. What insights can we drive from this? We can look at things by roles. So looking at roles, maybe we can see that, oh, in this case, use case and dummy projects, they're quite light in color, right? So this may mean that you have been under-investing in those two types of content types, but both can be really important for a developer to understand and get started with your tools. So that's an opportunity. We can also look at things vertically by looking at the stages. So in this case, what we're seeing is that there's really strong coverage of documentations. The technical documentation team has done a great job. However, the evaluate stage and the advocate stage is quite light. In other words, I think we can argue if this is the current content offering, the developer journey is broken. It means that there are developers who discover you through the existing offerings, but then are struggling to find content available for them to consume, to answer the question of why you, right? Why should I choose you over others? So that will be another opportunity. So from this analysis, we have some insights driven from our content mix analysis. And use that, we can inform our content strategy. And in this case, the strategy can take the form of a content backlog. In this backlog, every single line represents an individual piece of content that you can choose to invest time to produce. We can mark in terms of what journey they're for, what content type it is, or what specific topics. And then to groom this list, we want to understand how to prioritize it, right? So we're going to do that by understanding what's the impact of publishing it, but also what's the effort of just creating it. And from there, together in two considerations, we can then inform the final prioritization. So here, we're looking for what are the must-haves you just cannot skip, and what are the low-hanging fruits. So that will be how a full journey, if you want to answer the question of what developer content should I create next, we start with our existing content mix. We identify gaps and opportunities by mapping it to our framework of content type by developer journey. From there, we see the gaps and turn those gaps into net new content that we can groom through a content backlog. So that's the first example. So far, so good? Awesome. All right, so moving on to the next one, another theme that has been coming up a lot today is that developers are different, right? So this is the 2024 Stack Overflow survey about developers in their community. The fonts are really small, you don't have to look at the details, but the theme here is there are just so many different types, right? And that means that this audience is highly fragmented. So in this context, regardless of are you working on events, are you working on content, are you working on products, one thing that we all need to think about day and night is what developer audience should I prioritize? So let's see how we can address this one. Again, going back to our approach, the first step would be the data. So in this case, just like a typical persona or segmentation analysis, our data would be the individual developers. So each person as a data point, they may have very different personalities, characteristics, personal background, or the situation at their jobs. So that's the ocean of developers as our data set. And then what's the next step? Is to see how can we make sense of it, right? So making sense in this case means how can we find patterns or themes that can help us make decisions. So to do that, we also have a few toolkits that we can use to help with our thinking. In this very specific case, we were working with a company that have open source large language models. So in the world of AI development, a quick clarification here, we're not talking about end users using an LLM like ChatGPT, but rather a developer integrating a model into their application to do something else. So in this world or industry, there are two steps I think we need to think about when it comes to persona or segmentation. The first is their characteristics, and the second is your desired developer behaviors. So let's look at each one of them. For the first one, what are the characteristics that does the best job of differentiating them to help me understand their importance? Again, in the world of AI, the two things that we have learned is first is skills, and the second is their roles. So skills is quite straightforward. We're talking about beginners or expert across the spectrum. This is important because it impacts the type of project they may work on, the level of support they may need, and the kind of questions they may have along the way. The other characteristic is roles. We define it as either a builder or an explorer. So builders are developers who are creating commercial products for enterprises. And explorers are those who are building personal passion projects just for personal use. But clarification here, they're not mutually exclusive. A developer can be a builder during the day for their full-time job and then become or turn into an explorer at night for their personal projects. Or someone may start as an explorer fresh off school, and in a few years' time, they may become a builder through their new job. So with that, we will have another matrix that gives us the 4 segments when it comes to AI developers. There will be the beginner builders, the expert builders, the beginner explorers, and the expert explorers. So that's our segment. Now we have made sense of our ocean of developers to some extent, right? And then we want to see how can we prioritize that. To do that, I think one of the really important thing is to make sure you are very clear on what is the number one developer behavior you want to prioritize based on your OKRs or objectives. So going back to the world of open source LLMs, the two things that we have seen as important, one is download, the other is customize. So download here means developers going on Hugging Face, downloading a version of the model that you have published as your official product. This one may have more of a short-term impact or immediate impact. Like a developer download your model today, then your total number of official model downloads increase, right? The other thing they can do as a behavior is they download your model and they customize it. So think about fine-tuning, think about merging, think about quantizing, all the things they can do. And then they can bring it back to the community. This one wouldn't really have a short-term impact because it takes time for them to do all of that, right? But they may really have a long-term impact in the sense that they could become the next most downloaded model in your ecosystem. I think about all of the derivatives of Llama, all of derivatives of other open source models, right? So they do have an impact. And the reason why I want to emphasize or bring up this topic is that in your discussion of who to prioritize, the answer may be different depending on what behavior you're going after. Often what we see is that our clients or our marketers want to drive everything, but then you're going after everyone means you're going after no one. Right? So let's see in this case how the answer could be different. If we're only looking at, I just want to drive the number of total downloads of the models that I have published, maybe you want to focus on the beginner explorers, mostly because there are just so many of them available, right? So we're thinking about the total population. We're thinking about the ease of conversion, meaning are they kind of have a really high or low bar of you are interesting enough for me to download? And also, do they have the resources to download the model into their local system? So that may be your prioritization. However, if you're looking for, I want to have more customized models in my ecosystem, do you think beginner explorers are the right person to go after? Can I do that? Maybe not, right? So what we found out is that in this case, the only group that really drives this behavior for you is the expert explorers, right? So here we're thinking about, do they have the skills at all to know how to do that? Second, do they have the resources, especially computing resources, to run those customizations? And the last is, once they have done that, are they able to and willing to share it back to the community? Sometimes they're proprietary, right? Then they can never share it back. So the only group or the most important group that you should focus on would be the expert explorers. Although they might be so small in number that if you're focusing on total download, they barely drives the number up. Right? So that's the type of insights we can get by understanding our developer audience. And from here, then we move on to our strategy. In this case, it may take the shape of a community roadmap. So maybe you have already identified this is the list or order of who I want to go after based on the different behaviors. It may be a mix, but because now you not only know the who, but also what's the end result of what, so then what you can do is layer on top, over time, what are the different initiatives that you can roll out in order to support and encourage them to accomplish those behaviors that you want them to accomplish. So that will be another journey of if the question is, what developer audience should I go after or focus on? Then we start with the data, which would be the list of profiles of individual developers. We look for themes based on their characteristics and the desired behaviors. From there, we understand the prioritization and turn them into a community roadmap, focusing on the who and the what. So that's our second example. So far, we have talked about content, we have talked about community, and I want to take a step back even further to look at the overall program. And in this case, at this level, I think one thing we all have to deal with would be the budget. This is also coming from the 2024 DevRel agency survey about the annual developer program budget through the survey. There are many different types or the range, but regardless of the size of your budget, all of us are trying to figure out how should I allocate it, right? How can I make sure I put my resources in the most important area to drive the most needed impact? That's our last quest. And let's see how we can answer this question following a similar journey. Going back to the first step would be data. In this case, the experience would look very similar to the first example of content analysis. So in the first example, what did we do? We collected a list of existing content. Right? So in this case, instead of a list of content pieces, we will build a list of existing initiatives. Think about different events, different social media, different content, different programs. That's your data. Either you are from a really small organization where a few people wear multiple hats, or you may be from a larger organization where every single person may have a few really well-defined roles. In either cases, I think what is missing oftentimes is a holistic view of just what are we doing? Because the developers don't care which team is doing what, right? They just care about, can you provide me a seamless, smooth developer experience? So that's where we start. We'll start with what are we doing to understand what are our strengths and weaknesses. So that's our data set. And then again, to make sense of this data set, we will need some sort of frameworks. We argue that a holistic program would have 6 areas, including technical content, developer portal, marketing content, performance media, developer events, and developer community. So we believe that a holistic program should have all of them working together at the same time to power your developer journey. And then for each of these areas, we have broken them down into sub-areas. And then for each of these sub-areas, we have built a system of scoring it from 0 to 10. 10 representing the best-in-class offerings within their developer program. So that's our framework. Now what we can do is apply this framework to your existing developer program to see, are we checking the box? Are we doing a good job? And where are we lacking? So it may take the form of something like this, where we can see, overall where we are at the program level, and then a second layer of details on where are we really excelling, what are the areas that we are falling behind. On top of that, in addition to the fact that we can audit your developer program, we can also audit others. Think about your direct or indirect competitors. This is critical because developers are not only just looking at you, they are looking at other options to understand who can provide me a more seamless and trustworthy experience. So you need to understand how you stack up against competition. And this will give you another view of where are you excelling or falling behind compared to your competitors. So that will be our insights. What we can do then is to turn that into a developer roadmap. So that will be our strategy, meaning from year 0, year 1 to year 2, where you can focus on. So in this very specific example, we were working with a company that was just starting to build their developer program. So everything is starting from scratch in year 0. And then we would talk about what you should focus on for year 1 versus year 2, and now we're working on a year 3. A few highlights here. For year 1, we would focus a lot more on developer portal and technical content disproportionately, because they are the foundation that allows a developer to understand you and get started. And then once you get your house in order, then you can throw a party. That can mean investing more in the second year when it comes to events, when it comes to paid media, when it comes to marketing content, etc. So that's how we have completed the last journey of answering the question of how should I allocate my budget? We answer that by looking at your existing investment and initiatives. Then we audit it based on our developer marketing framework. From there, we understand our strengths and weaknesses and turn that into a market developer program roadmap. So that's what examples I have for you today. They're all based on real case studies that Catchy has done in the past more than a decade. So far we have talked about developer content, developer community and audience, and developer budget and program roadmap. There are lots of tactics that many of you may have even more best practices. But for the sake of today's call, when it comes to overall, how do you demonstrate your personal value or your team's value of what are you doing? How can we trust that you have helped your business make a better decision? Is this approach of using developer frameworks to try as much as possible, right, to make the better decision that is based in data, infused with developer insights, and then leading to specific tactics that you, your team, or your organization can take. Today, we've shared a few specific examples, such as the journey, such as the content types, and the list can go on. So I would encourage all of you to try out to see what other frameworks may work better for you, or what are the existing changes you might want to make to those frameworks to make it fit better for your situation. And that's why this whole process is always iterative, where we're constantly working on how do we collect data, how do we clean the data, how do we present the data, how is our framework being built, how do we define good in our framework, and how we can turn them into tactical plans for different organizations. That kind of wraps up my session. Well, thank you very much.